my name is Stephanie, and in today's video I'm showing you the process of my latest watercolor painting, Van Tropical. This painting is based on my town, the one I currently live in at least, Van, and its timbered houses. So Van is in France, pretty close to the ocean, and well, you can look it up if you would like to see where I live. It's a smallish town and we have a lot of timbered houses. Now, I imagined gigantic tropical trees growing on top of those houses. And I'm not sure you know or you remember, but I've visited Australia last year. I'm still very inspired by its nature. The roots, vines, trees and birds I encountered there were so inspiring to me. A lot of those have been injected in today's painting. I have added some rainbow lorikeets. Those are the little birds flying over the houses, and those trees are directly inspired by what I saw in the tropics of Australia. Now, I would also like to add that I made this drawing along many others for my coloring book. Yes, I made a coloring book, which is coming out next week on November 28th. So be sure to check that one out as well. I know you can already pre-order, and depending on when you're seeing or watching this video, you might, just order it. If you're into coloring book or if you just want to support my work, ordering one of those coloring books would be very helpful. Now, the coloring book project has really taken a lot of my time and health this year. It's been a labor of love and sweat, and honestly, I cannot wait to see it in its final physical form. But yeah, I will do that in another video. I just wanted to let you know that this drawing will be in the coloring book. Now, the original idea for this painting was to keep my palette very limited, with a selection of 6 rather dull and granulating pigments. I like to challenge myself occasionally using colors I use less often to see if I can make them work for me. And honestly, it's also just really fun to figure out new color combinations or ways of working with colors. I really love colors, but I like to push myself out of my usual comfort zone, because I think otherwise my work tends to be always the same, and I really don't like that. So I try and find new colors and new color mixes for my work. Another bonus of a limited palette, or limited palettes in general, is that you mix more freely, and in a way you think less about the colors, which it might sound weird, but basically you have less colors to choose from, so you just readily mix and you just get better at mixing, and it's weirdly easy. That being said, the palette I picked for this painting is not what you would call a good palette to start with. It's not like the most useful pigments to use in a good mixing palette. It's a very odd one. Sure, you have yellow, blue and red, but it's just the tones are very soft and granulating and not the usual mixing colors. It's certainly not a palette I would recommend to any beginner. However, if you have been playing with watercolors for a while, this could be a fun one to try out. The 6 colors I originally picked were the following. Ochre, which is an opaque color I seldom use, but is technically a great mixer and a color I would like to use more just because I have so much of it. Chromium oxide is a dull, opaque green that I used to love at one point, but for some reason stopped using. I am not sure why, probably because it's opaque. Cerulean blue red shades, which is a pigment that is always on my studio palette, but that I usually use either alone pure because it's so soft and nice, it's a beautiful color, or along with other more vibrant blues in mixes. Oxide black, PBK 11, a very granulating and dull black. I am using the one from Schminke, and that is important because the one from Schminke is less dramatic in terms of granulation and slightly warm. Buff titanium, an unbleached titanium white that looks like sand and is also opaque. Quinacridone Rose, PV19, the quinacridone everyone loves but me, as I always have quinacridone magenta PR122 on all of my palettes across all mediums. This limited palette makes for beautiful, soft, granulating mixes, and I created it one day while playing with my colors. The core idea of this painting and video was to discuss the concept of mother color and use ochre as the mother color of all of my mixes. And to be clear, the painting started perfectly fine. I would say about 80% of the painting was done with those 6 pigments. And to be honest, I think it was a good call because it eventually created a rather complex, soft and granulating underpainting that I later brought to life with some glazes of my usual go-to pigments. However, and I have to be honest about this as well, using only those 6 pigments would not have been enough for my style and color preferences. First issue I ran into was the black. You all know I like using black in my mixes and for backgrounds. Now, anyone who tells you not to use black but rather Payne's Gray is, how to put it mildly, an idiot. Payne's Gray is a mixture of black, blue, and sometimes a hint of pinkish red. Sepia is often a mixture of black and brown. Most indigos have some kind of black in them. A lot of the darker, moodier colors are actually mixes with black. So having black on your palette is going to open up mixes in the shadows. And as much as I love the darker pigments like perylene green or anthraquinone blue, most of them can actually be mixed using a bit of black. What I'm trying to get at is that black is a very useful mixing color. The potential issue can be to use it as pure black. I say can. Well, this is also perfectly fine and I do it all the time. It can lead to not so great results if you have no clue what you're doing, or if you're trying to get shadows and you use pure black but it wasn't really intentional, and then you have something that is very contrasty but maybe that's not what we were going for. Use black with a bit of caution, but it's a very useful color to have on your palette. Black is actually always part of my core palette, and I tried last summer to have a limited palette without black. I had 4 colors, yellow, blue and red, very neutral ones, and I decided to go with a burnt umber and not black, just to, to try it out. It was a complete pain to use. Sure, you can mix black yourself, but that's just another extra step for me when I mix shadows. But anyway, back to today's limited palette. As I mentioned, the black I picked here is Oxide Black, PBK 11, and it's the one from Schminke. This specific Oxide Black is quite warm, laying somewhere between sepia and black. You can find other Oxide Blacks that are more black, like the one from Daniel Smith. However, the one from Daniel Smith is way too dramatic for my taste. It's a bit of a diva, and honestly, I like to be the one deciding where my painting is going and not the colors I'm using. So granulating paints are all right, but I need to be able to handle them. I don't want them to live their own life, so to speak. In any case, the usual trick to have a deep black is to add some blue to it. But on my limited palette, I only had a very soft, granulating and opaque blue, the cerulean cobalt blue. So I decided to add a bit of quinacridone rose to mix a sort of Payne's Gray. I really needed a darkish Payne's Gray for the roofs. And honestly, that mixture was a bit tricky to use as those pigments just kept separating on the mixing plate, but I still think it made a beautiful, very soft Payne's Gray. To be fair, I think this color selection would be best for someone who loves soft granulating mixes. As for the black, I actually loved mixing it with colors to create darker colors. Any color mixed with Oxide Black gives an exciting mixture that is a bit dark but not too much, and textured but still keeps the relative vibrancy of the color you mixed it with. For the mother color of this painting, I picked ochre, which again I don't use much, even though it's probably one of the most helpful mixing colors. And to be honest, I did use it a lot in my life, and when I was much younger, I don't know, I stopped using it at some point. For those who don't know, a mother color is a color you use in all the mixes of your painting. The key is to balance the amount just right. You still want to retain the general hue of the color you are mixing the mother color with. Only nudge it slightly towards a mixture that will fit in with any other color mixed. When adding the mother color ochre to the blue, be careful not to go too much towards green. You don't want a green, you still want a blue, but just a slightly muted blue. Having a sheet of paper next to your painting to test out your mixes is going to be very helpful in that regard. Ochre is a good mother color, and it's probably the most common mother color among painters because of its earthiness. It's basically a very dull yellow, and you can make mixes slightly glow while also muting them. It's also a color that is a bit annoying to mix yourself, so certainly useful to have on your palette. Lastly, and probably most importantly, it's one of the cheapest pigments out there, so it's generally put into any watercolor set. You probably own at least one ochre at home if you ever bought a set of watercolors. And I can't deny that mixing all the colors I wanted with a bit of ochre really bonded them nicely together. And that's exactly what a mother color is supposed to do. Make your painting coherent in terms of colors. Technically, you can use any color as a mother color. Depending on what you pick, it's going to give a very different mood to your painting. Your mother color could be oxide black for a moody result, but you could also imagine to play around with a blue to push your painting towards a cool edge. That being said, most easy to use mother colors tend to be in the yellow-orange department because it's just something that gives a bit of a glow, a sunny glow to any kind of mixes. Whereas if you start and play around with blacks and blues and purples, it's going to be trickier to have nice mixes that fit nicely together. I can only recommend to play around with your mixes and colors around just one color and see where it leads, because we're all very different. So certain mixes will appeal to you more than others, and who knows, maybe you're going to find a bit of a signature style or color mixes. In my selection, I also picked buff titanium. I used it so little that I almost forgot to tell you about it, because basically I simply used it once, and it was to wash over all the facades of the houses. But to be honest, I think I could have done that with ochre and a touch of green, and it would have done the job. I can't say I find buff titanium all that helpful when working. I bought it because many people really love it, but I realized that as much as I sometimes use titanium white, pure for specific highlights or mixed for pastel look, I never really gravitate towards buff titanium. And this painting just confirmed that for me. I would rather have white and ochre on my palette than buff titanium, as the two would allow for many more variations. Also, my palette was already pretty opaque, so I didn't really need any opacifier like titanium either. Now, the chromium oxide is a color that I quite like, that I used to paint with a lot, but usually mixed with others. It instantly dulls any green mixes, which is quite useful as mixed greens can often be too vibrant. In this specific palette, I didn't really have much vibrant colors, so it wasn't really an issue. It's a nice pigment, I can recommend it. It's also one of the cheaper ones. It's quite opaque though, so you have to have a very light hand with it. The cerulean blue was a bit of an issue for me because it's so light in color. Yes, it is absolutely gorgeous on its own, and it creates lovely granulating mixes. Try mixing violets with it, it's just gorgeous. But it's a bit rubbish if it's the only blue you have, because everything it mixes is very soft. You can't really mix any moody violets or dark blues or dark greens, which is very frustrating and which I found really limiting in my painting. That being said, I have to recon that the final painting is extremely coherent in its muteness and vibrancy because of that. So maybe it was a good call. I probably would not do that again, to use only that blue, because it was it was difficult at times. As for the quinacridone rose, as expected, it is a great mixer, but do I still prefer the much more pink PR122? Yes. Is PV19 going to come on my core palette? Nah. I will be using it here and there in my studio for sure. There's really absolutely nothing wrong with that pigment at the core. I just find it too much pink for being a go-to red and not enough pink to be a proper magenta. I would rather have a quinacridone red PR209 as in one and only red if I had to choose. I would even prefer a perylene red, even if that means no violets. And ideally I just prefer two reds. The very pink PR122 and then either an orange or a perylene red or pyrrole red. Honestly, it's just down to preference with this one. I get why it's a popular pigment. I just never gravitate towards it unless I force myself to use it. Okay, so this all started with that limited palette, and then I really got frustrated with those soft and muted colors, and I decided to throw out the rule out of the window as it had served its purpose. Now, this is important, folks. Creating rules in your art is great. Do it. I do it all the time. It helps to push you out of your comfort zone, and honestly, just limitations really help you create art because it removes certain decision making. If you limit yourself with certain colors, then you have less thinking to do. You simplify your approach and it opens up new possibilities. It frees your mind in a way. Rules are really great. But sometimes they suddenly get in the way and you just have to change them or just stop using them. So I changed the rules. And the first thing I did was to bring in a beautiful, rich black. Perylene green PBK 31. Perylene green is a very green-leaning black and probably one of my current favorite. I decided to go for this one as I needed shadows for the leaves and I wanted a black background that would work with the palette. Now a pure black was out of the question. It would have been too much for this painting that was very soft, and since there's not much blue anything, indigo or Payne's gray didn't make much sense. You have no idea how happy I was to be able to push the colors away from soft towards contrasted. Now, of course, adding a lot of contrast also means you will need the colors to become more vibrant. So what I did was pretty straightforward. I used my favorite pigments to glaze over all of the muted softness. I used quinacridone rust PO48, which, yes, I still have, that soon to be discontinued pigment. But otherwise, I would have used transparent sienna from Schminke, which looks very close to the quinacridone rust, nickel azo yellow PY150, and perylene red for the red, oranges, and yellow. I also used sap green from Holbein, which is a mixture of PY150, PG7, and PR122, along the warmer colors to glaze over the greens. And then I used the classical phthalo blue PB153 and ultramarine blue PB29 as my blues, mixed with others to mute them. I also used a bit of lamp black, because I couldn't help myself, to glaze over the trees in the background, and that really pushed them back into the shadows. The painting took quite a while to finish, mostly because I worked on other things at the same time. As much as the limited palette felt limiting after a while, I really liked how the painting turned out, and I do think doing an underpainting with ochre mixed in and then glazing vibrant colors over made for a richer, deeper finish. I'm really glad I made these choices, as I learned quite a lot during the process. I do hope you found this video and all the explanations helpful as well. If you watched until now, please leave a tree emoji in the comments below. I love seeing all the emojis pop up when I post a video. It helps with engagement and it motivates me to make more videos. It also just makes me really happy. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I really hope to see you in my next one. Bye!